And you guys will tell me when you could see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. So and now you can you still see my screen?
Yes.
We can.
Yes, we can.
All right. Well, I didn't see my screen. Okay, here we go. Now you can see everything, can you?
Yes, we can
Okay.
see everything.
Okay, I've one moment. Um let's get the I apologize for asking this, but you can still see it, right?
Yeah, so we see the presentation and we see your video right next to it.
Okay, it's I don't know, it's doing this side by side thing.
And it's a very nice tie you have on.
It actually looks really good.
Okay.
Yeah, it helps. It helps to see you next to the presentation.
Oh, that's nice. Well, thank you for that. And I think this was listen. First of all, Susan is unable to join us. Both of us are actually at an event, and she's the host because she's the chair of the board of the 30% Club. And I told her to keep. Although it's cocktail hour now, and I do have a cocktail that's off screen, and um, so I was able to grab one. So you'll see me partake with that a little bit. Let's call it water for now. So I'm going to lead you through this, and but I can't. The way I will get rid of the screen at some point. But if you have questions, I'm just going to ask you to speak up. Don't raise your hand because I can't see it because I actually hit a button and I don't feel like figuring out how to do it. At some point I will. But if you speak up, I think that will be the rule. Because I'll fly through this without seeing you, and I'll fix it at some point. Is that fair? Is that okay?
All right.
Okay, so it says Susan, but she's not there. So here we are in our journey, and today we're talking about boardroom diplomacy, and I'll do a review of where we've been in a second. But just to set up what we're trying to talk about today is, and we phrased it boardroom diplomacy because we think it's sort of accurate to use that phrase diplomacy, which is about how to get the work that you need to do done as a board member, but there's a certain way you go about it, which is different from maybe how you do as an executive in your day job, different from how you may do it if you're on a nonprofit, local church board, or some other nonprofit school board. Slightly different, certainly different how you do it if you're elected official, inside of a state government or even Congress. That corporate boards work in such a way where there are a lot of unwritten rules. And if we sort of talk about, really is about the art of how you ask questions, because that's really the currency that board members work in, which is asking questions. And it's sort of a very interesting way of getting the work done as a board. I have a very good friend who's been in the governance space for a very long time, and he was monitoring a panel, and someone gave him the compliment afterwards. You're so very good, and the way you do moderate the panel and how you ask questions, and he sort of explained. He says, "Listen," and he's been a state senator for a long time, happened to be in Maine. And he says, when you're in a state legislature, the power really rests with the executive branch, with the governor. So the only way you really have power is the ability to ask questions. So I've become absolutely keen and very good at asking questions at the right time, right place. And that's going to come into play in a little bit when we talk about it. And I thought that was an interesting point about how he's mastered how to ask questions from being a state senator, and that's where his power comes from. Because legislatively and from a judicial, the way the three branches are set up from a state level, the governor gets all the power, the executive branch. So if you want to get a little bit of power, you got to learn how to use it. And that's sort of the same thing we say inside the boardroom, which is if you want to be effective, you have to learn how to be effective. So that's what boardroom diplomacy is all about. And we're actually going to do a case study, which you have not received a case. I don't think so. But so we'll go over the facts and we'll be able to walk through it, and we'll talk about the protagonist and what she did wrong and what she could do better, because the case leaves you at a particular point where she needs to make a decision about what she's going to do or how she's going to behave, and we'll be able to walk through that. So I should have had it on this slide, because that's what we're actually trying to do, which is because this tells you what we're going to walk through. And of course, there is time for Q&A, but as we've done in prior sessions, if you have a question, let's deal with it right now. And if it's something which I just want to put in a parking lot, we'll put it in a parking lot and we'll grab it a little bit later. So this is just showing where we've been. We had a discussion of board committees. We talked about, well, before we did that, we just talked about sort of what boards do and how they do it. Then we talked about board committees. We had a whole hour and a half talking about stakeholders and ESG. And I'm going to come back to that 3-letter term in a second. And then we've presented a roadmap of how we actually get to the boardroom, and what we have to do as candidates, or as we're not even candidates now, we're pre-candidates, how to get ready for that. And part of getting ready for that is doing what we're doing today, which is understanding boardroom diplomacy, which we think helps once you get on the board. And we think, and we've done this enough times with other groups, that we know playing out these scenarios, which may seem familiar because you may have gone through something similar in your current role as an executive, that it just helps to be in a group and sort of brainstorm it out about what you should be doing. I told you I wanted to go back to this phrase ESG, which environmental, social, and governance, which is a nice, neat phrase that is used to talk about a whole bunch of things. And that's sort of the issue where we are in 2023, heading into 2024, which is that this phrase, which has been around for about 30 years, really, recently got a lot of prominence as folks understood that it meant environmental, social, and governance, and that it really stands for, I call it the 3 Ps. A product, there are products called ESG investment funds. A process, there's a process and thinking around environmental, social, and governance. And what I think is really sort of preference and purpose. But people really use that phrase for a lot of different things, to mean many different things. And we currently have a practice amongst ourselves in the Board Leadership Center. We rarely use the phrase. So now that I've told you all about ESG, I can tell you that we rarely use it, because we think, it's become a little bit politicized, not a little bit, a lot politicized, about what it actually means. But it's also, we believe, not exactly clear. And so what we tell folks is, you got to understand what it involves and what it is. But when you're talking about particular issues inside the boardroom, outside, wherever you are, to have great clarity. And if you're talking about environmental issues, talk about environmental issues. Don't label it all, well, this is an ESG issue, because that involves so much. So be clear what you're doing. If you're talking about human capital management and your employees and return to work policies, then talk about return to work policies, as opposed to using this ESG phrase. We just think that clarity helps, one, avoid the politics of folks who are anti-ESG, or folks who don't know what that phrase means, environmental, social, and governance. ESG stands for that. And it just makes things clearer. So I just wanted to say that up front. Although you see the phrase, we use it. I teach a law class. I've taught for 17 years, and I think I phrased my class for law school. It's an advanced corporate law seminar in ESG. And I phrase it that way, so using the phrase ESG, because that's what the kids know, and I need to get them in class. But I spend the first 2 days explaining that they should have some great clarity around what E and the S and the G mean, and to speak about one, two, or either of the three in their own spaces. So that's just my advertisement there about ESG. Let me pause. Are there any questions? And again, I can't see you yet. So I have this deck, 2 decks in front of me, 2 of the same decks.
I agree with you.
Oh, good. Well, I heard that. I appreciate that too. So I just want to talk about the boardroom environment and some of the soft and hard skills. One, and I'm going to state the obvious, right? That these are consensus-driven institutions. And what I mean by that is that, and here is where it's very different from Congress or school board. I served on a school board for 12 years, where, look, you take votes and majority wins. 9 people, the 5th vote is going to win. And often, as a seasoned politician, I'd have to tell new politicians, your most important job, in a political space, is to be able to count arithmetic. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When we get to 5, I'm gonna let the minority speak for a minute, and then we're moving on because I have the votes. Not so, and inside of boardroom, they're consensus-driven institutions where they want sort of unanimity to make decisions, but there are plenty of times where you can't get unanimity. You're going to try to get alignment that people understand what you're saying. And look, if you still don't agree with where the majority wants to be, you make that known, but you got to move on. Right. We do take votes. The minutes will record votes. Most of them, or many of them, you like to have a complete consensus unanimity. There are times where you might have to record a no vote, and those are important. If you really disagree with what someone's doing, what the board's doing, make sure your voice is heard. Often, those things are tried to work out before the vote is recorded. But it's a consensus-driven institution, and you may have heard the phrase. I think we had it, and if we don't have it here, I'll bring it up because we may have talked about it in the past. A consensus skepticism, which is you're paid to be a skeptic. Now, if the CEO says it's raining outside, you should open up the window and put your hand out. It only take a second, but your job is to be a cooperative. Actually, it's cooperative skepticism. Is you're not against them. You're right. This is not Republican, Democrat, blue and red. But your job is to have a counterbalance as an independent director, a counterbalance to management. And often that is very helpful to management, that you're able to provide that balance. At the end of the day, you all want to have alignment and agree, but it's a consensus-driven institution. The reason I raise that is, 1, because it is, and 2, also to understand that in a consensus-driven institution, where you really need to trust the person next to you, because you do want unanimity. You don't always get it. What tends to happen is that people trust themselves, so they tend to replicate themselves, which is why you see boardrooms that tend to look exactly like each other, because those are the people they trust. Who you trust yourself, so you replicate yourself. And it's often hard to go against human nature in an environment where you want consensus, to have dissenting viewpoints, or people that forget dissenting viewpoints, people who come from a background or skill set or even a heritage different from you. It can be scary to people, which is why we believe in having a process to disintermediate that natural human practice of trying to replicate yourselves. So boardrooms are consensus-driven institution, and that concept will come up later when we look at the case study. There's a hierarchy. You're all equals. You're all equal board members. But really, there's a hierarchy. The more senior board members, there's a chair of the board who runs the meeting. There's a chair of a committee. And you just want to understand that. I often say, one of the best things, pieces of soft skill you can have walking into a boardroom is to be humble. I do it as a service provider, as an advisor walking to a boardroom. But if I were a board member, by the way, when you usually walk into a boardroom as a board member, they have nameplates Usually it's not paper. Usually it's you have a nice nameplate and you're seated already. It's seated somewhere already. Sometimes your nameplate will be on a desk and you're to take it into the room. And I always like to sort of look at the chair of the board. Where would you like me to sit? Don't assume that you're going to sit where you normally like to sit, which might be in the fourth chair down or at the end of the table, what have you. Just asking the chair, and the chair just being polite, and the chair was like, "Oh, wherever you want. We sit wherever we want." So you get to understand that's how that board operates. In some boards, people not only have assigned seating, but it's just understood. He sits there, she sits over there, whatever it might be. So just a nice thing to ask the chair, hey, where should I sit? And they'll tell you, hey, you sit wherever you want. You're a member of the board, and we don't painstakingly think about where people should sit. That's what I mean by understanding and respecting protocols. It goes such a long way when you're able to have that deference and let people tell you what the unwritten rules are. By the way, that happens. It happens even more often with management who comes in to give a board presentation. And someone will come in and they start sitting down, and I'm like, no. You wait to be told where to be seated because you're certainly not a board member. And the chair will have a space for you where to go. And so you be humble too and wait to be told where to sit and when to speak. Um, and sort of the soft skills moving there is about how, of course, you're a director and not management, and that's absolutely key. And we'll get to sort of asking questions, and really there are statements that you would want to make, and in your normal life you would just make the statement. But here we're going to learn to turn that statement into a question, which is really the way a director is supposed to interact with management. The point about knowing what you stand for personally is deeply important. That's important because you know how far you need to be pushed, and you might not be comfortable with something, but you're able to get alignment, meaning you understand where management and the rest of the board is going, and you can agree to disagree, and you can sort of go along. But there might be something where you're just not, you're just vehemently opposed to proceeding, and those they don't come often. Hopefully they come never. But you got to know what you stand for personally and what you are not willing to stand for professionally, because that's deeply important. And again, hopefully that never comes up, but you got to know where you think the line is. And of course, the hard skills of doing your homework is deeply important. By the way, it is assumed, and I think you may have heard this before, it is assumed that when you walk in that boardroom that you have read the entire board packet. Even if, and usually you get the board packet a week before the 7 days before the meeting, even if it's 500 pages, and often these board books are 500 pages, but the assumption is that you read it, and because we tell management and giving a presentation, do not walk in and read what's on your deck. They've read it. You should assume that they've read it. And just rereading what's on the deck is it's sophomoric. But you are assumed to have read everything in the deck. So that's why it's so important to do your homework and own your expertise. And what that just means is that you're not meant, if you happen to know cyber and you're really good, that's what you do in your day job. When the cyber issues come up, it's sort of expected that they'll hear from you, and your other board members who may not have that expertise will lean on you. That said, you don't want to be the know-it-all on that subject. What I mean by that is that telling management or telling the head of cyber security at the firm, well, you should do this, you should do that. You want a little bit of humbleness. I reported to a corporate governance committee of my board several years ago when I was in private practice as a head of corporate governance of a large asset manager. And on my committee, the chair of the committee was often called one of the grandfathers of corporate law, a law professor at Harvard Law School. And it was a little bit intimidating because this guy wrote the book, and he understood really what his role was, and it wasn't management. No, it was as a trustee, and he would always let me do my thing. And when I got his blessing, you would know when he sort of didn't agree with something, you would know too. But I knew when I left the room that many of the board members would turn to him and say, "What do you think about that? What did we just hear? And is it right? What have you?" Which is why also I had the wherewithal that before I walked into that boardroom, maybe a week ahead of time or 2 weeks ahead of time, I knew where he stood on an issue of corporate governance because I called him and I would bat things around with him so that he knew where I was coming and I knew where he was coming because I wanted to know what he would say when I'm not there. So that's what it means to own your own expertise there. Let me pause there to see if there are any thoughts or questions before we go into the director inquiry. And we're going to do this, and then I'll pause for about 15 minutes and change the screen. And yes, that is Prosecco that I just took a sip of. But I'm a full, by the time we're done, we'll see where I am, but I'm a full faculty. I have my faculties right now, but we'll see where we are in an hour. I've done so many board evaluations over my lifetime, and it's interesting when I think about how other directors, your fellow directors, how they judge each other. It really does come down to the quality of the questions that you ask. And what I mean by that is that when you talk to directors about what they think about the director sitting next to them to the right and to the left, they're usually, and because we do this under the, I'll make a report to the board, but it will be without attribution. So the board members don't know who has said what. So speaking candidly, they'll tell you. And it usually centers around not the quantity, but the quality of questions asked. What you hear is, well, he's never prepared. Or he has a lot of questions about stuff that's already in the packet. So you could tell that he's not prepared. Or he's a nice guy, she's a nice guy, and he's a nice guy. And I had a 7th grade teacher who would say, nice is one of the worst words in the English language. Like it means nothing. And by the way, you would like someone to say you're a kind person rather than a nice person. Long story on that. But the idea, but if someone who asks good quality questions can be objectionable in every other space. They could be a bad drunk during the holiday party, or constantly eat with their mouth open when you're at board meetings, which, by the way, does piss off. It pisses me off. But if you ask quality questions, they'll sit next to you. Like they really want to engage because when you ask quality questions, you move the conversation along, and you're usually asking a question that other people either might have or don't know that they should have, and they'll walk away like, good question. Okay, now I get it. Now I understand it. So it's the quality of questions that you ask, and we usually use a framework called the 4 rights, which is ask the right question at the right time to the right people and wait for the right answer. And asking the right question is easier said than done, and we'll come back to what the right question is. But let's do it right time, right people, right answer, which is sometimes asking whatever question you have, the right time might not be at the board meeting. It might be several hours or days before the board meeting. So you can get information on and get the right and make sure you're asking the right question. It also might be that you don't want to embarrass management inside the board meeting. That is best done outside the board meeting. And the right people, meaning it's always important to go through your chair of a committee or your chair of the board and then to the CEO. But it might be someone below the CEO, and you should get permission. I need to walk through with the CFO on this issue, and getting permission to do that is the right protocol. By the way, if you're on the audit committee, your employee is the chief audit executive that has some kind of dotted line to the CFO. So they are sort of different. When the auditors actually have an employee as the chief audit executive, and you don't need permission to talk to that person. But protocol is that if you're talking to someone of management other than the CEO, you want to go through the CEO. You want the CEO to know that you want to talk to her employee. The waiting for the right answer is the part about, and we see this in my former role as a securities defense lawyer in the early 2000s, and Enron, WorldCom, Tyco, sort of run through all those issues that we were all facing, and I had the I guess the fortune or the unfortune of being part of teams, at Wilmer Cartler Pickering of defending those executives or doing those investigations. We can often see that eventually the board may have asked the right questions, and even sometimes to the right people at the right time, but they didn't wait for the right answer. And they still got into trouble. Bad things still happened. So you got to do all four: right question, right time, right people, and wait for the right actions. This is sort of the same thing, sort of a different format of, asking information to acquire the right information, listening to the answer, assessing the info, and then deciding what are you going to do. Right? There has to be an action after it. Is the importance of sort of the inquiry model. Oh my God. Sorry. The inquiry model of a board member. Here's a question I'd like to ask the group. If you could ask only one question, and this is sort of not a fair thing to ask, but it does work out from a practical thing to ask each one of you, which is that if you had the opportunity to ask only one question at each board meeting, what would it be? Not knowing whether you're working for a consumer products company or oil company, whatever it might be, what's the one question that you'd ask? Sorry about this. Please. I stopped sharing my screen, and I'll share it again, but I want to see your faces. What would that be? What's the one question you think would be important to ask at each board meeting?
Okay, I'm going to take a stab at it.
Hi,
I would say, hi, Steven. On the lines of what are your biggest concern on what you have at hand? What worries you the most regarding A, B, or C strategic or growth initiative? What is that right now? What worries you or scares you the most? That will be a question that comes to mind to me.
I will add what keeps you awake at night, right? Like if you had to choose one thing, I think it's really going to what Diana said, right? What is the one thing so they could help us also understand the priorities in their mind?
So you're asking it so you can get to why are you asking that? What keeps you up at night? Is what's your desire or the design in that?
What are the potential roadblocks that they have? What are things that are changing on market, or what is it that is different maybe from last meeting that now could be something that we need to figure? What is the plan B? What is the action? What are the things that we need to pivot or not?
And I heard from is it Caitlin? Also, I think I heard the phrase prioritization, and I didn't hear the last part. What was it?
Yes, I think if they define one thing, it helps us also understand the priorities of the, because if you have an open question, right, everybody's gonna come with 5 bullets or 10 items that concerns them, and they're gonna be in different fashions and all, right? I think if you say, give me one thing that keeps you awake at night, and as we listen to it, it kind of becomes the priority where we need to fix. I think it helps me understanding the priority, right?
Right. No, I appreciate that, both of those statements. Getting to understand what management thinks is a priority is deeply important. By the way, if you think there's another priority, that's good to know too, because then you can have that conversation. But you want to know uh, uh, how they're thinking, what their priorities are. Um, can you provide your thinking on how you arrived at that conclusion? I appreciate that, which is uh, uh, good question to ask. That's that cooperative skepticism, which is getting to understand what's the thinking behind it. I once did it wasn't a CEO, it was I just can't. She might have been the chief audit executive. I had a conversation. This was a couple of years ago, and I just remember for some reason she was talking about, oh, and we have a great diversity program. I can't remember exactly why we got onto this, but I stopped her and said, "How do you know? Like, did you win an award? Did some third party say you have a good diversity program? Did you?" And then she looked shocked. I said, "Listen, I'm on your side. I'm not the police. I'm just playing the role of cooperative skepticism, which is if you tell the board something, you got to have a rationale behind it. You just can't say, I believe this is blue. They're gonna, oh, well, it looks red to us. Like and it's something like really basic, but you got to come with the rationale behind why you are saying something. And one of the things that's deeply important that I try to tell executives presenting to boards, which is they got a 500-page deck. They know what happened last quarter. They might even have an after action report about what happened. They certainly know what happened in performance because they're approving financials. So don't do descriptive stuff, at the board meeting. Like tell them. And when you walk in a board meeting, they got that. You want to hear what a board member should expect is for them to be predictive. What's going to happen next quarter, and why do you say so? And what are you going to do to make it happen next quarter? That's really like the hard discussion, and the more interesting discussion that you want to have orally, at the board meeting, because you've read everything they've said about what happened, right? You want to understand where they're going, and you want to hear that conversation. So that's sort of the type of questioning that you want. Are there other questions? And I know that there's stuff in the chat, and usually when I have Susan, we tag team. So I'm going to be awful and ask that you actually say it, because my chat has. I'm using my real estate on this computer to see your lovely faces instead of having a chat. So other questions, and then we'll move on in a second. But
this is Manny Ramos. I put it on the chat, but I said, what strategic initiatives or changes can we implement to ensure the long-term sustainability and success of our organization?
Gotcha. I did see that in the chat. Thank you for that, Manny. Yes. Other thoughts? By the way, there's no right answer to this. This is just this exercise is meant to help us think about finding that one question, which, by the way, is not that far off. When you think about how many board meetings you have a year, 4, 6, and the idea that you don't want to you want to go for quality and not quantity. You want to think about what are the questions you're going to propose. And actually, when you go through the board book, that's one of the things you want to write down, or it's electronic, you want to highlight. What question will I ask about this? And by the way, the reason I ask the questions that you need to get more information, you want to learn. You also, and this is a little bit, it's just a practical thing. You need to show your other board members that they're getting their money worth. Like that's why they put you there. And you want to share that you've read it, you thought about it, and here's a thought that you had. Susan was at a client 2 days ago, 3 days ago, and we talked about. Well, I knew what the presentation was about, It was about climate change and a few other things. And she said to me that these guys, it was a very good conversation, and how they had thought through as a board a number of different things, but it was really interesting. They have more than one product, but let's say they make cars. They don't make cars, but they had failed to understand, at least in that room. Maybe there are people outside of the board who understood this, how climate change was going to affect their one product. And they all looked up and said, "Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, we never thought about that," which is sort of funny because I think that's mission critical. Your fiduciary duty to understand how these risks. And by the way, this was a big risk, climate change, to something which is absolutely affected by climate change. I think, I'm not an expert in it, but I think this has to do with animal husbandry and other things. Like, I think this affects what happens to that particular thing. If your temperature goes up 3% or 1%, do they still operate? Can you still, get production out of that? But that was 2 days ago. Today, they are having that conversation. Management is all over that, and to be able to respond, to the question of this mission critical thing and how this risk affects that product, which won't be tomorrow, but we all know that this is something, climate is what we have to sort of deal with. Other thoughts, as you speak, I'm going to share my screen and do it the right way.
So, Stephen, I had another question for you. How long are the board meetings typically? Is it 3 hours, or 4 hours, or how long are the board meetings? And then the reason I'm asking the question is, how many typical questions are there? Are there 10 questions we're talking about, so we need to come up with one good one? Or there are 100 questions, and then there's more probability to ask questions? Because I'm kind of curious. That will also help decide what question you ask if you only have X amount of time.
Excellent question. Now, a typical format for a board meeting, the periodic board meeting, is that they'll have the committee meetings the day before, or it might be 2 days before, whatever it might be. But usually, if you have a physical meeting, it's a day and a half. You come in, that first day as you fly in will be the committee meetings. And that second day, starting early in the morning, will be the full board meeting where the committees are reporting out to the full board. And time is always of the essence, and boards never have enough time to get what they want to get done. But they'll start for that full board. They'll start at 7:30 or something, or maybe 8, but they're done by 3 o'clock or so, because the idea is that folks get to sort of make their way home. So there is a clock on that meeting, right? And what's important is to understand that clock, because you don't want to go down rabbit holes. You want to finish what you need to be done. And from a boardroom diplomacy type point, you don't want to be that guy that people say, "Oh, he's always asking questions," and some of them are not relevant to, and I'm going to miss my plane because I'm sitting here listening to this guy, right? By the way, this is one of the things that from a good governance standpoint, as an advisor, I'm always looking at whether or not at 3 o'clock they're having an executive session, which is the session of all the independent board members without anyone else there, on the way to the airport. Like, folks are packing up, so it's not they're not really engaged. I think that's bad governance. It happens all the time. It's not the way to engage the board. By the way, in the committee meetings, audit committee meetings usually are a lot longer than the other committees. They could be 2 hours to 4 hours. And audit committee, you go a little bit longer. Many committees meet online, like this, to sort of get the work in. And then there's work outside of those committee meetings, outside of the board meetings, that go a long way. So all that to say is that you don't have a lot of time. So you want to think through those questions. And again, you want your questions to be aimed at One, getting information if you need it so that you can say yes to something. And by the way, if you can't get to yes, it's sort of, you try to move it off the agenda, right? And good CEOs or chairmen of the board understand that, and they see that if there's unreadiness, to use a Robert Rules of Order meeting management language, if there's unreadiness, and you really don't have to, if it's not mission time sensitive, you might move it off the agenda because you can see that there's disagreement. And again, you want to get full agreement. And so there's something you might move off the agenda if you think there's unreadiness. But that's your typical board meeting will be a day and a half. Sometimes you do retreats that are 2 days. During the pandemic, boards were meeting every week and some every day over the phone or over Zoom for an hour or two to get an update. You and then many corporate secretaries will put suggested times on the agenda. Some don't do it because they just don't want the record of we said you spend 10 minutes on this very important decision. They don't want that memorialized. Always you should say suggested so that it's not memorialized like you did spend 10 minutes on this merger acquisition, which went wrong, which you're being sued. And a year later, they see the minutes that just spent 10 minutes on it. But there's generally not a whole lot of time. There's enough time, but not a whole lot of time. Let's put it that way. So hopefully that's helpful in explaining how that should work.
Thank you.
Sure. Did my screen share? No.
Not yet.
No, okay. That's that I shouldn't have to ask you. I should know by this time, but actually this is gonna work. Good.
It's coming. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's coming.
and I can see you guys now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do have like 6 questions. I think as we thought through what's sort of cool to think about. One is and we've heard some version of these. Now, how do we know? That's my favorite question, right? It's just to determine the veracity of the facts, processes, and procedures. So if you tell me we have great diversity, my first question is, how do we know? How do we know that? Because I want folks to, I want management to give me the evidence. Please provide us with a copy of a policy. I really appreciate that question, particularly when, because it's a trust but verify. So to use a Ronald Reagan phrase, you're going to trust, your job is to be cooperative skeptic. I'm going to trust you because we're part of the same team, but I need to verify. I once sat in a board meeting and sort of issue came up, which wasn't my issue. I'm sitting there waiting to talk about my issue. So I'm just sitting and I'm just being a spectator, not really listening. And I heard them have this discussion. Actually, it was about another company. It was in the news, and their CEO was fired or quit because he had a relationship with a subordinate. And then it became an issue of whether or not they had a policy around that. The company that was in the news, and the question came up: do we have a policy? And I think it was the general counsel started to speak, and I knew they didn't have a policy. And he said, oh, yeah, no, it wouldn't happen here because of this and that. And all I was thinking is for a board member to say, that's great. Can you send us later the policy? Like ask for it, because I knew they didn't have it. And I think it was so important that you don't have to be confrontational. And again, right time, right place is like, we don't have to litigate this right here in the boardroom, but you have a conversation about a policy that management has, which is pretty important. Ask to see it, not then and there. Like send it to me. You'll get it, but they have to make it up first. I knew they didn't have it, and I was just shocked, and I didn't say anything. I'm like, board, ask that question. Can you give us a copy of it later? What keeps you up at night? We already heard that. What should keep me up? Let's just a different version of that. I like audit committee chairs to ask that question of their auditor, external auditor, of their chief audit executive, the internal auditor. What should keep me up at night? What do you think, person who is there day to day, person who is the external independent auditor, what do you think that should keep me up? Can you provide us with scale and context? Very important when you just are unfamiliar with the issue, because you're trying to sort of zero down unfamiliar with the expertise. For instance, someone who is giving you a cybersecurity report and tells you that no, we had 18,000 attempts at penetrating our system. Well, okay. I have no, I don't understand that. Many of you do. Give me context. Is that good or bad? Because what I do know, not being a cyber expert, anything close to that, is that it only takes one penetration, right? It only takes one to get through. So you want to, sometimes you have to tell management, all right, help me figure out, is that good or bad? Give me scale. What happened? What are our peers doing? How does that compare to our peers? Is it bigger than a bread box? Something like that. So it gives you scale. What's mission critical to the firm? It's something which I think going in to joining a board, once you're on the board, to understand what's mission critical, right? If you are on the board of Boeing, you do a lot of things for the government, and including and for other buyers, including making airplanes. And if your mission critical product, like an airplane, falls out of the sky and your 737 MAX gets grounded by the FAA and everyone else on planet Earth, yeah, that's mission critical. Guess what? Every single board meeting, you have 15 different questions about that mission critical item. And when they tell you it's fixed, you must do more than trust and verify. You literally need to sort of noses and fingers out. That's when you put your nose really in and have your fingers ready to sort of get into the business, because it's mission critical. And these are recent case laws about what your fiduciary duty is, actually out of Boeing, there's an ice cream company that got into trouble, Bluebell, which some of you may know, that had, again, one product, ice cream, that had a listeria outbreak in its factory. And the court said the board did not go deep enough to understand that management actually fixed the crisis that was happening to their main product. So what's mission critical for the firm? And finally, are we comfortable with that level of risk? Which I like that question, because it's put into, you're not accusing the CFO, or you're not accusing the CEO of something. You're asking your fellow board members about how they feel about the level of risk they're taking on X. And what it does is it puts a statement into a question form, and you're asking about how they're comfortable. And you're trying to get on record about how they feel, and let the other board members understand something which is absolutely squarely inside of the board's remit, which is not execution, but risk appetite. And by the way, this comes up later in our little case study. Let me pause right there to see if there are any questions or thoughts. And we'll be able to spend the next 40 minutes in this case study.
One item, just a question / comment. I saw a bunch of articles on Jamie Dimon about what he talks about in the board. And he says the main topic to talk about is the probability that things will happen or not happen. I don't know if that's a question that the board member will ask, or more of a management item. This is the probability that this event will cause us miss earnings, or this event will cause us to do X, Y, Z in our financials. But the question of a different way of asking the risk question or tolerance question is that, what's the probability of something happening? Is that a normal question that you see quite a bit in boards, or is that something more Jamie Dimon off the cuff?
No, and when you talk about Jamie Dimon, you sort of substitute that. I mean, obviously, it's hard to substitute that, because he, because he works for one of the larger banks in the world, and he's been at it for a long time, which means he's a seasoned CEO, seasoned board member, and he has it down packed, which is at the board meeting, what you want to know. Like, you read the Wall Street Journal, they've given you, where interest rates are. Like, that. You want to hear from him. Well, here's what I think the probability of what happens if the Fed rate goes down, where we think business will go, and why we need to be ready for X. That's what you want to hear as a board member. That's the back and forth you want to have with your other board members who come with other opinions, perhaps. So he's absolutely right. That's the type of stuff you want to have at the board meeting, which is, by the way, but you don't want to just simply have pontification, right? At the pandemic, March 2020, April 2020, there were a lot of prognosis of, well, we'll be out of this by June. I remember hearing that, and I was like, wow, okay. Now I don't know much, and I'm not a doctor, but I kind of understand pandemics and infectious disease. I'm not sure where you guys are getting this. But really, that also was the question for some board members, which is, what are you, CEO, what are you hearing from your medical experts? So, and many CEOs had medical experts, their own medical experts, as opposed to waiting to hear it on the Today Show about how to think about what was going on in this space and what they needed to do in crisis management role. By the way, surprisingly, many of the top companies, because we have these meetings with lead directors of Fortune 100, and at that time, there were rarely any questions about employees. And so how we hear now about people thinking about their employee base and what their employees needed, whether you would give that dividend or you'd pay employees out who weren't at work and wouldn't be for the next 2 months. Yeah, that wasn't the question they were asking. That was a little bit shocking. They'll all say that, yeah, no, we care about this. It took a couple months for folks to sort of figure out that that's the question they should be asking. So thank you for that. We can learn a lot from Jamie Dimon and others who've been in the position for a long time about how to manage the board, because that's certainly part of management. Well, here, and I'm going to go quickly through this because I want to hear your point of views on this. This is a case study. It's called When Inquiry Goes Wrong, or Should She Tone It Down? And I think I have the facts here, because and this should have been something that was sent to you. And my apologies. I don't think we have. Because it would be easy. I didn't want to have to go through the facts. But very simply, here are the facts. They're very basic. A Florida-based shopping center development group, which is a publicly traded REIT. So it's a real estate investment trust. It's publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange. Maria is our protagonist. She's a new independent director. She used to work at Goldman Sachs. And this was her industry. She was a real estate analyst at Goldman Sachs. She's retired. She was the financial guru. This says she then was a retired CFO of a private real estate group. She knows her stuff for this REIT. Like, she is an expert. She's Latina, and she's the only person of color and the only female on this board. And she joins this board because the CEO is the chair. It's the CEO of the board. And it went to business school with her. That's how he knows her. That's how she got on this board. And he's asked her to be on this board. He happens to be the son of the founder. The founder's still around. He's the chairman of the board. He's 10 years younger than most of the other board members. The other board members are friends of the founder. They range from law firm partner to a banker to an industrial company to a guy who runs a trucking company, a pretty significant trucking company. And the CFO, which is the other protagonist here, is an industry veteran, long-term friend of the chairman, very respected by the rest of the board. So what I'm setting up here is that you have a board meeting, public traded company, second biggest REIT in the United States. Maria has joined the board. She's the only person of color on the board. This is her expertise of the real estate group, and she joins the board. This is a lot of words, but I'll tell you what happened, which is that from the very first board meeting she joins, there's a fair amount of tense meetings, and that's because she's going head to head with the CFO. She constantly challenges the CFO at the meetings. One board member then accuses her that she has a private agenda against the CFO, who they absolutely love, and considers her pushy. Another director said to her face that she talked too much, just like my teenage daughter. My God, you talk too much like my teenage daughter. Another director said that he understood that Latinos had passions and hot tempers, but never experienced such an aggressive behavior. Maria believes the CEO should come to her defense. He does not. He privately appreciates the fact that she's bringing up this inquiry at the board meeting about the CFO, because his numbers are a little shaky. And actually what the issue is that he's presented numbers a scenario that was built giving interest rates facts that were of yesteryear, and hasn't considered what would happen if that interest rate changed. Because if it changed tomorrow, they'd be in a very, very different position. But the CEO tells her, who's her friend, college classmate, hey, listen, you got to stop arguing with the CFO. The CFO says if you can't tone it down, no, he's going to leave, and I really need him to be here. So Maria tries to figure this out, and she actually calls the CFO and says, can you present this information? I need XYZ. He actually does present XYZ, more information at the next board meeting, but is not getting to the issue that she wants him to get to and wants the board to take care of. So she starts to lay into him nicely, but really grilling him inside the board meeting. And later, the CFO goes to the CEO, the son of the founder, the son of the chairman who's there, and says, look, you see what I deal with every day or every board meeting? You have to, you got to do something about it. And at one point, the CEO calls Maria in and says, look, you're going to have to tone this down because I can't lose the CFO. And he's well liked by the other board members. He's a friend of my dad's, who is the chairperson, and you've been hitting him up pretty hard. And you got to tone it down. This is a Friday. She says, you got to tone it down or else. And that's how the case ends, with her being told by the CEO directly in person, you're going to have to tone this down because it's not working, and then leaves a sort of or else. And Maria leaves for the weekend, and she goes home and she takes a trip to see her sister. And her sister, who's not involved in the industry, is letting her cry on her shoulder, and the sister's listening to her recite the facts, which I just recited for you. And the sister starts asking her questions, some basic questions like, okay, well, I don't understand real estate. That's not my gig. That's yours. But she has some good questions for her, which are just dealing with conflict resolution. So that's how the case ends. Hold on, I just stopped sharing my screen here. And I can help you remember the facts. And again, I apologize for not sitting this earlier. But it's Sunday. She spent the weekend talking to her sister about everything that's happened. She's upset. And on Monday, she needs to figure things out. Is she going to tone it down, as the CEO told her? Or will she do something else? And so that's the question that's put to all of us here. How do we go about this? What should she do? Thoughts? And if you need more clarification, I can give it.
I believe the first thing she needs to do is a very good self-reflection. If she's really just kind of picking on the CFO, or if she's seeing something the others are not seeing. At least for me, the case is not that clear, because if she's seeing something that others are not seeing, and if she's seeing a high risk that's going to impact business results, I think she needs to find a way to speak up. That's her role as a board member.
So she should speak up, Andres. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. The fact that at the outset we posit that she's the only woman, a person of color, and a Latina seems to set it up for a question around whether she ought to pipe down, partly as a result of those characteristics of being in multiple minorities at that board table. And that's going to bias us all more towards saying, no, she shouldn't shut up. But is the question whether she ought to be approaching it differently instead? And does it go back to the point about asking questions that make it harder for the other board members to shrug it off?
So let me what should, and I'll go to the next person in a second. Put yourself in this position. So this, you're Maria, but you're not Maria. You're who you are, right? So if you're Alvaro, you're Alvaro. But this has happened to you, you know, and it's you've had the weekend to think about this, and on Monday, you need to call the CEO and do something. Then, in that something could be, look, I'm out. I'm leaving. That something could be, I'm not leaving. And then fill in the blank. What's your thought here? What would you do in this situation? And by the way, I know there are many of you who would say, "Well, I wouldn't be in this situation in the first place." But you're here. You're here,
Yeah.
and you can imagine. Matter of fact, actually, it's probably easier. Let me just switch this a little bit. You're Maria's sister or Maria's brother. So let me sort of take it out of personally, that it has happened, and you need to give her some really good advice about how to proceed on Monday morning. So what do you do, Andres? What do you do?
So, Steven, I would advise her to make the right questions, but not necessarily in the board meetings, but outside the board meetings. Confrontation is not helping. And if she finds a way to let the CFO get her questions and have him present them as his own merit, things could get going easier.
Okay. And I'm sorry, hold on. Andres was
Yeah,
say
thanks.
something, then I'll come to you, Diana.
I think I would advise her to stand her ground, because her main duty is to the shareholders, and she's not doing them a favor if she retreats by taking into account that she's the only person of color, the only woman, the Latina on the board. If any of that makes her retreat, she's really not serving the shareholders well. Mm-hmm. Regardless of how she goes about then setting the course straight.
Mm-hmm. And Diana, and then I'll come to Priscilla, and I see Miguel and Eduardo. We got, oh, good, we're all in it. So I see everyone. Okay, Diana.
So for me, the issue is not the CFO. I think the problem is with the CEO. Mm-hmm. I think the discussion is he brought her in because she will bring the value on the financial perspective. And the question I will have for him is, if he doesn't see the issues with the financial situation and is not willing to step in to address the issue with the CFO, you know, that's not a problem you can solve. He needs to solve the problem. He needs to understand the issues that they are. And because all of these relationships and their friends is like, well, that's not how you're going to run the company, right? Because I think that will be the heart-to-heart with him. The issue is with him, not mm-hmm. the CFO.
Mm-hmm. Priscilla, please.
You asked at the beginning whether she should tone down. Mm-hmm. I think the entire way that the questions are being asked is not the usual way that the board member would behave. Mm-hmm. I don't remember if the company was public or not. If the company is public, so mm-hmm. There goes a little bit beyond. She cannot just quit and leave things as it is, because she was already part of the board and she saw some things that she doesn't believe. So she needs to think about what are the implications to herself, even if she's going to leave and she knows for sure there's something wrong. Right. So but I do believe there's, independent of who is right or wrong, there's a whole behavior in the way that we approach the board meetings, mm-hmm. which need to follow a specific procedure and the specific way that we ask questions. And if they are not responded, we should formalize the way that they should be responded, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's not about toning down or not. I would just refer much more and be very tied to what is the right procedure to go when there is a question from a board member that's either not being addressed or being addressed in a way that is not proprietary to respond to the things that are being asked, for example.
Gotcha. So let me do this, and I see everyone. We're gonna get to you in a second. I want to deal with the two issues that you brought up, Priscilla, which is leaving and that she's asking the questions the wrong way. Let me just deal with leaving. It's not in indentured servitude. She can leave tomorrow. Just send a note, hey, I'm gone. There's a consequence to that. And beyond what potential liability, because she still was a member of the board, but actually the way I look at that is that she's going to leave before this blows up, right? But more importantly, is that leaving is an option, and I think that's someone that if you're her sister or brother, counseling her is like, look, if you don't need the
Just
headache,
leave.
you
Yeah.
don't need the headache. But at the same time, when you leave, and again, she's retired. She's doing well. She doesn't, the money's good, but she's done well in life. But when she goes for another board seat, they're going to say, well, what the hell happened at this REIT?
Yep.
Or they know the people, they want a referral, and that referral, it's not going to be good, right? So there are consequences to her leaving personally, really related to how she's perceived in the market or how she's perceived in the board market, because she left, and it will be obvious. And if it's not obvious, even if she left, let's say 3 years from now, folks are gonna still ask, how did that go? And they're gonna meet the CEO or the chair or whoever at the club. It's like, wasn't Maria on your board? What do you think about her? And that conversation may not go well. So if you're Maria, you want to think about that. About if I were to exit, here's a consequence. By the way, there may part of this case, I think, is that there's some things that need to happen, but always on the table is that maybe I should leave, but there's some things that need to happen before then, and so we'll talk about that. Ivana and then Enrique, and as some folks have dropped their question, and please put your hand back up. Manny, I see you're there, but we're going with Ivana now. Ivana first.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, so I would say that it's important. One of the first bullet points that I see is that she constantly challenges the CFO at meetings. And I think something that it's important for anybody who's serving at a board, it's a little bit of more of that EQ and leadership. And what I mean by that is that we don't know how people will react. There's different personalities, and some people, when you challenge something, there is this pre-assumption that there's psychological safety and it's fine and they welcome it. But if they don't know you and you're new on the board and you're challenging somebody, it might not be that person's style. So I think a lot of what needs to happen as part of like being able to be effective in board meetings is to understand the style of the different people who sit at the board and connect and understand what are their goals, where do they want to go, what's preventing them, so that with that insight, that person can connect more at board meetings and take things offline. So so my recommendation to this person would be to ask a lot of questions, pretty much what you're teaching us today. Ask a lot of questions on a one-on-one to the CEO and to the CFO, and try to understand what the gap is, where they're coming from, and see truly if it's something that maybe just a style in communication and engagement.
I appreciate that, Ivana. Enrique, and then we're going to Manny.
Yeah, hi. I'm trying to put together a few threads of what we've talked about here before, and one of them is, I don't know if the people that were in Florida a couple sessions ago, I think, when Jesus Mantas was giving us a bit of a talk, and he said that some of the value that he brings to so many boards, that he's the one that says, hey, everybody's saying the floor is white, and it's like, wait, no, it's black. And I'm just trying to see if there is a parallelism here where it seems like it's like a bit of a group of friends or colleagues that tend to go to group thinking, right, in the board. And I wonder if she's identifying that group thinking, and breaking group thinking. It's really hard, right? And so that's one thing I was saying, like maybe, and by toning it down, it felt to me like she actually was asking very important, relevant questions for the entire board to see. Like, it seems like the company is the stock is rising, but as an experienced CFO, she's seeing that maybe the underlying assumptions are not as good, right? There are some ratios that she needs to find out. So I'm more on the line of like, she should continue remaining on the board and asking these questions. And I guess the question for you, Stephen, is, are there actually worse implications if she decides to stay, right? Because I think we talked about it at some point that when you quit a board, it's a big thing, but you have to have a real reason. And if she feels like her fiduciary duty is not being paid attention to, and she feels like she's on a board of a company that might be operating suboptimally, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, isn't the implication of her staying bigger than the implication of her leaving?
Indeed, and I think I'll sort of mention eventually in a few moments. I want to hear from many of the colleagues, sort of maybe a path that she might take. We'll come back to that. So Manny and then Eduardo. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Stephen. One of the things that I've noticed in my career is that when you're an expert, you tend to make implicit assumptions about what other people understand and what they believe your message is. So my advice to her would be to become a storyteller. In other words, provide context before you start asking the questions. Tell them the story. What is it that is concerning her? Why? What are the facts that lead you to ask this question? So that, because my assumption is that the board is all united in at least one objective, which is the success of the organization. So if you can tell the story as to why she's asking these questions, I believe that she would be much more successful in terms of getting them to understand why she's asking, and she doesn't have to tone it down because there's really no tone associated with it. She's asking because she has the best interest of the organization at heart, and that would lead to success. But she has to be a storyteller. You can't just go in and start asking questions without some context and implicitly assuming that they understand why you're asking.
Manny, you've hit it. You've hit it right on the nose here, which is, one of the things, if I were Maria's sister, would be pulling out a piece of paper and giving her a pen, and saying, "Look, let's just here's a format. We're gonna write this all out. First, I want to understand what's your issue.
Right.
Particularly, I like segmenting. What's the business issue?"
Exactly.
Right, and you I think you just said, which is perfect. As an expert, sometimes you assume a lot of things that are implicit because of your expertise that other people don't have. What is not getting out is the business issue, which is absolutely central. And the business issue is the CFO's projections are based on an input, the interest rate risk, which if it changes tomorrow,
right,
we're in trouble. And the other thing is, the actual case sort of ferrets this out a little bit more. I'm not sure if I mentioned this, which is that when they're a publicly traded REIT, second biggest in the land, their debt leverage is multiple times their competitors.
Mm-hmm.
So part of telling that story, which has not come out, which you would hope everyone would know, but it's very clear that they don't know, is that you're over levered much more than your nearest competitors, right? So part of diagram this out is, what's the business issue? The business issue is that you believe that they're over levered, and there's a question that you just don't know, that Maria doesn't know, which is, how comfortable are her fellow board members about being levered to in the way that they are? She doesn't know that yet. Right. That's what I'm talking about. There's some questions she needs to understand before she leaves the board, which, by the way, part of the solution is going on a roadshow per board member by board member and having a one-on-one where you get to ask that question and having a storytelling time where you put it to them. Because if the answer is they're all okay with that, you got to go.
Exactly.
Right. So because right now she doesn't have that information. She thinks by the way, because she's sort of flustered by not having the business information. So the business issue. That's what I'm talking about, diagramming out, like figure out what your business issue is. There's also always a social and a style issue. Like what's bothering you? And part of it could be that you sort of got over your skis and how you ask questions. They don't like you, right? So not like the people don't like you. That might be one thing. The other thing is that there were some rather sexist and perhaps racist stuff said at that meeting that I believe she needs to deal with, which she will not get the opportunity unless she confronts it. But and here's where the style comes out. And I believe one of the pathways is to go ask for a meeting one by one with each director and try to ferret out the business issue. So are you comfortable? Do you understand? And first saying mea culpa. I shouldn't have done this at the board meeting, and sort of saying sorry, not sorry, but there's a way, oh, I'm sorry, but because you got to get this information. Maria must figure out, are my board members comfortable with this level of risk? They may be, they might not, but you just haven't ferreted that out. Because by ferreting it out, you can also might say that they say, oh, she actually is an expert. Maybe we should listen to her. And then also dealing, oh, by the way, I'm never going to have another conversation like that. And you're never going to talk to me like your teenage daughter, because I am not. Right. I mean, I think they need to, and that sort of, I need to confront this. And you can do that in a way, and there are different ways of dealing with that. The way I would deal with that is that's going to come out in my conversation. But after I deal with this business issue, and then I'm gonna get agreement, like that shit won't happen again. I will not stand for it. So I think so. And you bring up a very, I think a great point of, and here I wanted to diagram out what's the business issue, like brass tacks. What's the business? Then what's the social style issue? Which, by the way, may be hard to overcome, or maybe intricate, and it takes maybe a lot of humility to overcome it, right? But you want to put both down. There's right, because right now she's not dealing with either, and you want to deal with that. The other thing about diagramming out is also put on a piece of paper the different protagonists. There's the CEO who is inept. There's the chairman who has no idea that his son is inept, has no idea that the son has asked her to keep grilling the CFO, but now doesn't like that it's done at the board meetings because he's getting pressure on that. And then the other board members. So diagramming out is like, what's your problem with each of them? But it all comes back to how are you going to take those two issues, the business issue and the social style issue, and how will you confront them? One of the better ways is doing this. It's going on a road show and talking to each board member and saying, yeah, I got off on the wrong foot. Here's what I really meant is, and I need to know, are you comfortable with this level of risk? If they're like, yeah, then you know your answer. You got to get off this board because you're not comfortable. Then you also deal with the other issue there. All right, it's Ragnar Miguel. And then Eduardo.
I think you answered it.
Okay.
What problems you're trying to solve? Problem one is the business problem. Problem two is a relationship issues with a bunch of people, including the CFO. So how do you have a dinner with the CFO and CEO together and try to break bread? You need to break bread with each person, and obviously she didn't do that. And sometimes you need permission to be the person asking the tough questions. And when you join a white male club, you need to kind of earn your stripes. Well, unfortunately, that's what's happening here a little bit too, which is unfortunate. Yeah. But she was a male. They will probably be listening to her, which is so sad. But but that's why I think that in this case she has to go the extra mile and going through each person and kind of talking to them, meeting them, dinners, lunches, and then if you get enough data from the CFO, once the bread is broken, then you can have the right data to have a conversation with the directors. But it takes a lot of effort for her. But that's you said it already. So
no, gotcha.
Nothing more from my side.
And Eduardo, we're gonna come to you in a second. But let me just say this: last week I have a industry group nonprofit I'm part of, and we're doing a strategic plan. And I sent a note to the strategic planner, consultant, and the CEO saying I was disappointed because I didn't see X happening. I didn't see where diversity was in it. And this planner wrote back, "You're absolutely right, it's sort of weak, but why didn't you ask this question during the full board meeting?" And I've yet to get back to her. But part I want to say is that one, I wanted to see where other people were. I didn't hear it. Because tactically, and this is where I think Maria should be, you want to know where board members stand. Remember about consensus driven and tactically from a diplomatic standpoint, your argument is better if you know where the votes are. You want to know where people stand. And that's why I in my case, I'm like, I don't know where other people are. I know where one person is because we talked about it. I'm gonna see where other folks are, and then I will be making my case to the bigger board, saying, look, it's my way or the highway, or I can make some statements about what's going on and understand the tactics. And the CEO just got back to me today and saying, let's talk about X. I need to have those private conversations to know where people are before I bring it up to the bigger board meeting, because at the end of the day, I want to win. And the way to win in a consensus driven, and this is a board, I forget how many people we have on it, it's a lot. I need to have my ducks in order. And that's where she needs to go, is to have her ducks in order and to know where people stand on different things. So Eduardo and then Enrique.
Thank you, Stephen. I think that there are many different things that have been discussed. I think that, first of all, her fiduciary duty with the shareholders, I think that that should be her North Star. Like, what's the outcome that she wants, to achieve? Second, the art of really these battles are won outside the boardroom. Like she has to manage the art of influencing each one of the board members and understanding what's their agenda. And so when she gets to that meeting, she can deal with the bully and deal with the person one by one outside before she gets in. And then I think Miguel was talking about the kind of telling the story. I think that, it's important that usually you have facts to be able to tell a story, super important. And also to be able to give kind of an example, if you're going to show risk of something that has happened in the past in other industry, so board members can relate. And I have an example of something that happened here in which we're talking about a big disruption and big pivot in the industry when, cloud, was growing and all the OEMs were, very stressed out because, all this shift in a massive way. But our teams were really not kind of seeing that. So then my boss at the time, he basically started using the analogy of Blockbuster. And I started to give all the different examples of what happened in this case. And then how Netflix came and, kind of, and how did they reinvent it and transform the business model? And in that way, he brought everybody in with an example of a different industry. So he could make his point. So that's, some of the things that I think that and by the way, she should have a one-on-one with the CEO and to express then the personal side of it, never, publicly.
And thank you for that. And I do believe, and often I've said this about this case, and it may not superficially on the face seem like it. I actually think at this moment on Monday morning, she has a fair amount of power, because a lot of people think that she's sort of powerless. And what I mean by that is by sitting, I believe she should go on Monday morning, sit with the CEO and calmly say, look, I may have gone about this the wrong way, but I'm going to speak one by one. I'm going to correct that with my board members. A. B. I'm also going to deal with what you didn't deal with and is sad as a friend, which was the language that was used in that boardroom, because that was messed up. And I think less of you for not being a leader in that, but I'll take care of that. And B, I'm going to become nom-gov chair, and you're going to make it happen, because the next board member to join this board will be a woman. And before I leave this room, I need to have that agreement from you. So that's what I mean by sort of getting something out of it, which is that, that I'm going to be the nom-gov chair. We're getting another woman, will be the next board member. And here's why. It doesn't even matter why. I'm just telling you what's going to happen. Because I also know what you need today is that you need some, you're trying to look for peace because you think you need the CFO, which, by the way, by the time I'm done with my roadshow, they may agree with me. They may be not. Either way, I'll be able to figure that out. By the way, this is a publicly traded board. I'm a board member. I have no plans to, call the Wall Street Journal, but I will tell you, as a former securities defense lawyer at Wilmer Cutler, it happens all the time. These leaks happen, when you see a leak happen on this, and the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal presents something that no one else knew, it's because the board member has a reputation, a personal reputation, and his only tactic is to let the public know, without attribution. So that it's always leaks happen all the time, and it's because of that. Because they want the leak to be able to say, and this board member was against it. Or the minutes will show that they were against it. So I think she has a fair amount of power over this very weak CEO, including resorting to, and I'm gonna go tell your daddy, which is sort of a little high schoolish. It's not even high school, right? That's junior high-ish. But you got the point is that she has some stuff in her arsenal that can really set her up sort of to be in the right place with this. But it does take some deep humility for her to understand that you did wrong. They did wrong by saying what they said. You did wrong by having this confrontation, and folks hate you, and you need to rectify that or leave. At the end of the day, you'll figure out by the end of your roadshow, you'll figure out if you can stay or not. And so as we wrap up here, this case study is meant to sort of think through some of these issues before they ever happen. And by the way, they may never happen. They may have already happened as an executive that you face these things. And so it's always good in a group like this to sort of play these things out. And I'd say as one of the big takeaways, other than, hey, this is the art of a board member is asking questions. Which is not easy to do, but the art of a board member, the real art is really asking questions, and it's a hard thing to do. But when you master that, you'll master how board members operate in that diplomacy. The other thing is, and it was said earlier, and I really like the phrase of, I guess it's also part of asking questions, but understanding how to be a storyteller and understand that particularly as an expert, you may be making some assumptions that you should not assume. That people understand the business issue. Certainly, they don't understand the social relationship issue, which they were absolutely crass about, and you need to check them on that. But it's the business issue. Remember, board members think about their fellow board members in terms of the quality of the questions they ask, and they're not even hearing her because of some of the relationship issues. So you need to put on paper, here's the real business issue, and really get to that question. Are you comfortable, Monica, with the level of risk that we're taking? Because let me show you, because I'm the Goldman Sachs industry expert, where our peers are in leverage and where we sit and what happens if that interest rate change, and how everything is based on that interest rate staying the same, which, by the way, it will not. But so are you comfortable being the second largest publicly traded REIT, having that interest rate move up, and here's where our portfolio will be? Are you comfortable answering the questions from the shareholders in the Wall Street Journal when that happens? Because I'm not. Right. So all that needs to happen. So it's being able to tell that story, and how you tell that story, and just not assuming that people understand what your business issue is. And then also dealing with, unfortunately, the sexism and racism that you have to deal with, which, by the way, hopefully before you get on the board, you would have smelt that out and not joined it in the first place. But as we say, this case is that it happened and you can't wish it away. And so that's where we are. So we're a minute over, so I'm going to apologize, but also say this case always brings out a long discussion, and I apologize. I should have started a little bit earlier, but I'm very happy for your input. Every time I do this, it's maybe the 15th, 20th time, I learned something, and I did so today also. So I want to thank you for being with me today. Susan is sorry that she couldn't be here. Be well to those who couldn't join us. And you'll get this case. I'm gonna send it through. We'll go on from there. And our next time we meet will be, I guess, the penultimate time. It will be the 6th time, our 6th and final end. But I think we also do we do another thing afterwards too, and we'll have real well, I have real Prosecco. But you will have that to yourself. You were prepared with that. Okay.
Thank you.
What a
Steven.
great
Thank you.
session. Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah, very good. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
Thanks,
Enjoy the Prosecco.
everyone.
Bye-bye.